Microsoft will retire Exchange Web Services, EWS, for Exchange Online in October 2026. If you're still using Threat Response Autopull, TRAP, with Exchange Online, it's time to begin planning your migration to Cloud Threat Response, CTR. In this video, we'll explain why the migration matters, what benefits CTR provides, and how to get started.
We're here today to talk about the migration from TRAP 5 X series into CTR, the cloud. There's a lot of benefits on why customers would want to make this migration that we'll go through in this webinar. We're going to lay it out on how to migrate, which customers can migrate now versus need to wait, a little bit before they can migrate based on different attributes in their environment. So let's get into it. We do have a packed day. We probably will finish a little early, but I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A in the end. Let's start with considerations for your current TRAP on-prem environment. Right. There's 3 columns here that you can see. Most customers are going to fall into this first column. It's available now with CTR. So there is feature parity with TRAP on-prem and CTR for 90+% of our customers. But what that means is that if you have a TRAP on-prem today and you fall into this first category, you can move to CTR. You do have no additional license cost as well. You just need to have your account team spin up an instance for you on CTR, and then you can start exploring the environment today. So it's very easy to get access to it. And then once you have access to it, it's even easier to set it up than TRAP on-prem. So there's no VM to manage anymore. It's all in the cloud, and it's all hosted by Proofpoint. Let's just go through this first column just to explain a little more on why most customers can fit into this first column and move today versus maybe you're in the on-deck column or the roadmap column right now. So match conditions, if you have the simple out-of-the-box match conditions for TRAP on-prem, the ones that are come pre-seeded with any source that you have, those are already up there in CTR and Cloud Threat Response today, and they are actually just populated for you when you start your instance. If you're just using that, that's great. You can easily go there. If you have more complex match conditions, such as you're using different conditions to filter out senders or reclassify messages, because Clear is saying something different, or you want to take a certain action on your TAP alerts, you can also do that in Cloud Threat Response as well. So anything you're doing in your match conditions pretty much today, you can do up in the cloud as well. So that's not a blocker for customers. CTR has fairly granular RBAC settings as well, and audit logs. So we know that was a big thing for customers for a while. The Microsoft and Google support is also available on Cloud Threat Response. There are definitely enhanced benefits for M365 customers with different quarantine modes, which is a big differentiator for customers who are facing throttling in their TRAP on-prem environments and other errors like that. There's source parity between all the other sources down there. So abuse mailbox, so the Clear integration is available there, the TAP integration, smart search, CSV uploads. So additional benefits is that there's data residency for any customers who need data residency in US and EU, full data residency through the entire Clear pipeline so that your data is being processed in region wherever you're at. And last, CTR does have a feature parity and even more for the API side. So there's message and incident APIs on the CTR side, as well as a new API which allows you to perform ad hoc quarantine. So you can send in a message identifier and go and have that message quarantined out of the environment, even if CTR doesn't know about it today. So it doesn't have to already be present in there, which is a huge differentiator for CTR over TRAP on-prem. So if you fall into this category and you're able to move, you can do it today. You can go reach out to your account team, they can spin up an instance for you, and you can start exploring this even while we're on the call, right? If you fall into this category, you're gonna have to wait a little bit, but you're a fast follow on, right? Federal customers will have to wait a little longer. CTR and Clear are going through FedRAMP certification over the next 12-ish months. So we'll have that on the roadmap. That's coming pretty quickly. Lastly, if you are doing password resets via match conditions, so this is where you have your on-prem Active Directory connected into TRAP and you're doing a password reset because of a condition that hits that match condition, that is on the roadmap right now. That's not within the next 12 months, which is pretty much our on deck column right here. But there are options still if you are on this in this roadmap column where you can run a hybrid environment. You can start testing things out for your certain sources. You can start doing CSV uploads and smart search exports and everything like that up in the cloud, which we'll talk about as well. But you can start start testing the waters while we work on these last few integration pieces. So I hope this made sense. If any of this is unclear, please reach out to your account team and they can help you navigate this a little further. They can even reach out to us or the customer success team, and we can help assess your environment and make sure that you have the right information for moving forward or knowing when you can move forward as well and moving to CTR. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Vivek, actually.
Thanks again for being here. Super excited myself to be talking about CTR benefits and enhancements. Why should you move to CTR? What are the buckets of benefits that you get as an end user? So first things first, for those who are more in the administrative role or will be the actual administrators of CTR or have been that for TRAP, this is not a VM. This is a SaaS hosted solution. So it's just a web URL that you go to, which means there's no maintenance of any kind. You're not hosting the VM, you're not paying for that. There's no concept of upgrades from version A to version B, and there's no need for you to worry about taking data backups every now and then because it's all hosted by us. I did get a question earlier, just a few minutes ago, about can we move things, or is there a configuration export option from TRAP to CTR? The answer is no. You can't just move a file from here to there and have all your configs available in CTR, but CTR is very easy to set up. Part of that is because you don't have any of that VM related setup at all, but it's also, we've just kept this down to what is really, really necessary for email remediation use cases, which is you just add the users that you need to be able to access CTR with. These will be typically existing users who already use TRAP dashboard or email protection and so on. Then you will, of course, need to connect your O365 tenant or your Google or your Exchange. And this is typically where it takes a little bit of time, especially if you have to work with other teams in your organization to get some of those credentials. But if you are managing that yourself, this should again be relatively quick. For customers where the match conditions and the sources, etc., have been mostly turnkey with TRAP on-prem, that means they have not customized it a lot. It is super easy. You just need to turn on the sources in CTR, just turn on the default workflows in CTR, and you're done. But yes, if you have built in some changes to a match condition for specific needs with your setup, you may need to spend a little bit of time in CTR replicating those in the automation workflows, right? I have helped tons of customers set it up. Last but not the least, because this is a SaaS-based offering, we have role-based access control for every section in the UI. That means you can restrict certain personas to access only the user management or mail server configuration and give access to your SOC team for much of the other pieces around the incidents and so on. Let's talk about the core functionality of Cloud Threat Response, remediation. That is remediation of emails post-delivery. If you are on O365, we have an exciting new feature called Quarantine Hide Mode. It's actually been around for a year now, and it really solves a huge problem that we had with O365 earlier, which was based throttling, which led to failures, and also just quarantines being slow because we had to move a message to a quarantine mailbox. Instead, what we are doing here is we are hiding the message, and it's much faster and it's more prone to much lower failure rates. CTR now supports both remediation for external emails that is coming from outside your organization, as well as emails sent within your organization, if you are also an IMD or internal mail defense customer. There have also been newer remediation capabilities launched in CTR both in the past and something that will be coming soon. So for example, over a year ago, there were very specific advanced BEC threats in the landscape, which we realized need to be pulled out very, very fast. And we built a fast track mechanism in CTR to be able to pull those emails. This was exclusive to CTR. There's also the concept of email subscription bombing, which has been around now for the last few months. We have remediation for that also coming in CTR very, very soon. And finally, this is a very vastly superior user experience. I don't know how many of you here have already delved or started using CTR, if not fully moved over, but the way you can granularize remediation numbers is great because you can see every message copy that was worked on. You can export that out or using CSV or APIs and build all kinds of nice reports in case you care about how quick or how granular the remediation was. As far as previewing emails is concerned, again, we have a superior experience compared to TRAP on-prem because you get to see a message text preview, you get to see a rendered preview of the HTML of the way the email actually looks in Outlook. And of course, you can download the message as an EML file. So especially the rendered HTML view was a huge success when we launched it, because a lot of customers love the fact that you can just open the incident and the message and just look at what this email was about, very quickly discern it before you decide to take further action. Last but certainly not the least is the fact that CTR is a path to the threat protection Workbench ecosystem. That is super important for future, capabilities around our SOC experience for email threats. So if you are coming from on-prem TRAP, a number of capabilities are already available. You have TAP for automatic email threat remediation. These are TAP alerts sent for inbound email from outside your organization. There's manual remediation you can do for emails that were circulated, again, within the organization or even sent from outside. You can use both CSV files and the Smart Search export. There is, of course, Clear, or abuse mailbox management solution, the recently launched IMD capability for internal mail defense, and we connect all three: Exchange, O365, and Google Workspace mail environments. What is to be noted is, because Exchange is what it is, that would work via EWS APIs. And with O365, we now support Graph and as well as EWS. But again, we would like you to set up Graph because EWS is going end of life eventually. We also launched APIs for CTR over the course of this year. These can serve a variety of use cases. As far as new and exclusive capabilities go, we spoke about hide mode. We spoke about Workbench integration. There's also a new capability where APIs can be triggered via workflows, which is also available now. And there's mail bombing remediation. So now let's actually spend time talking about each of these in some detail. Let's start with hide mode. So why did we build this, and what benefit does it give? If we go back a few years, because I'm sure all of you have been using TRAP for a while, the way the quarantine process works, when we know that a message has to be removed from the user's mailbox, we actually forwarded it to the quarantine mailbox, which is a pre-configured mailbox in TRAP. That's a shared mailbox, which means most of the SOC team has access to it, but the email is forwarded there. So it looks like it was forwarded from, say, Vivek to quarantine. And now the message in Vivek's mailbox is completely deleted. It's hard deleted. Okay. If this turned out to be a false positive, the restoration process or the undo process would involve forwarding the message back from quarantine to Vivek. And now when I open that message, to me, it looks like the message was sent by quarantine. And the timestamp on that message would be maybe just a few minutes ago, if not the original date and time the email was sent. And there would be other formatting changes in the email and the subject line and so on and so forth. So this is not ideal, because you yourself as customers have told us this, because you can't get the original message anymore right after it was quarantined. Also, because these actions are performed via APIs, they were just prone to higher rates of throttling by Microsoft, and it would just lead more occasional failures with these quarantines and restores. So what the hide mode does is it solves this by changing the notion of quarantine. We are no longer using that quarantine mailbox at all. Instead, we hide the message while it is still in the user's mailbox. So if the message was condemned when it was sitting in my mailbox, it's moved into a location where I, as the end user, cannot see the message at all. I cannot search for it. I cannot open it. So it's completely out of my purview. In fact, even administrative tools from Microsoft cannot go and open that message. Just because you are a Microsoft admin, it's not like you could go into some tool and try to find my message and open it. It's only accessible programmatically because we've put it in a location where we know where it is. And of course, that can also be triggered via some of the APIs that I spoke about earlier. The benefit that this gives is the message is retained in its original format, because it's like moving a message from one folder to the other in the same mailbox. So that way, if it had to be returned back to the end user when it was a false positive, the message remains in its original state and form. If the message had to be downloaded by SOC for further forensic analysis, it is also, again, in its pristine original form. It's also just much faster in terms of API calls with Microsoft. It's much more immune to failures or throttling and so on. So it's been a resounding success. We actually went ahead and made sure almost all of our customers using CTR with O365 are using the hide mode now. It's no longer in beta. It is fully available now. It's been there for a while, and I would definitely encourage you to try this out as you move into CTR. This is also key to a first-class experience in Workbench, because there are capabilities in Workbench which rely on being able to look at the message, and the hide mode enables that. So what is Workbench? Let's quickly talk about that. Again, if you've been with Proofpoint for a while, you're quite familiar with this trifecta of applications. There is email protection or cloud admin. There is TAP for the TAP dashboard, which is used for threats and for reports. Email protection, of course, for all the policies and so on. And finally, there's cloud threat response that we are talking about right now. There's also a unified management layer underneath all this, which is used to set up things like SO, sign-on, and other things around access control. The problem with this setup is there are redundancies across these portals, things like user management and so on. There's also a scattering of data. As a SOC analyst, which I'm sure a lot of you are, you often need to jump across these portals for if you're looking at a threat and now you want to look at the messages associated with that threat. And now if you want to be able to, make policy route changes or firewall changes in the gateway for that. So you need to be jumping back and forth. And there's no single place where all this data around a message and around a threat can be shown to you in a neat way and like a proverbial single pane of glass for you to be able to work on this threat. Our vision is to evolve these portals to become very, very persona oriented. So if you are an IT admin, all you would need to be doing is accessing the unified management console in most cases, because that's where you set up access to everybody in your team across these portals. If you are into the throes of email security, email firewall rules and things, access to your O365s, Exchange and Google and so on, you would be in a configuration console whose sole purpose is to have these configurations, which are mostly one time, but require occasional updates. The day in and day out work for SOC analysts, which is threat investigation, threat response, additional follow-ups, forensic analysis, and so on, would be in a portal called Workbench, which is available today. And finally, for reporting needs, basically any reporting needs, that you would be going into the reporting dashboard, which can again be opened up to SOC analysts, but is primarily meant for execs in the security group. So Workbench is our first step towards this long-term goal of a persona-oriented UI. So the next slide talks about what you can get in Workbench. This is just, I would say, you're just scratching the surface in what can be done here. If you have access to email protection and TAP, and if you also have CTR, you should also have access to Workbench. So I would strongly encourage you to either work with your admin or check out the apps which are on top yourselves and try to get into Workbench and see what happens. So we're looking at a message inside Workbench, which was opened after you search for that message, just with a very similar Smart Search-like experience. But now what you are presented is dramatically different from Smart Search today. What you're seeing here is an initial view of the message. There are both textual and screenshot views of the message, which are available, as you can see in the highlighted section. And this gives you a lot of basic but important details about the message in terms of who sent it to whom, whether it was blocked or delivered or removed, and whether this was sent to specific important people in the organization or VAPs, and so on. All of this data, or I would say much of this data, is being powered via CTR, because CTR is able to talk to your O365 or Google or Exchange and be able to get some of this data out and show it in Workbench, right? So you will not be able to use Workbench effectively if you are using TRAP on-prem, because we don't have Workbench working with TRAP on-prem today. And it's super important for you to be able to get all this when you are in the process of going about your security investigations. So now we are looking at the timeline section on the right, where the same view in Workbench is giving you a detailed chronological step-by-step view of what's happening with that message, all the way from when it was received by the gateway to when it was condemned by Proofpoint and when it was eventually removed from the user's mailbox. So now that removal piece again is powered by CTR. And you can also see there's a reference to an incident in CTR. So now let's move on beyond Workbench to the next piece. Let's talk about APIs a little bit, because one thing I do hear off late a lot from customers who are well versed with CTR and who are like mature deployments there is, okay, this is all great. I want to be able to take all this data out, or I want to be working somewhere else. And I really need to be able to work with CTR via APIs. So great, we understood that very well. And of course, this was something that you could do with TRAP in some ways. So I would break this down into two use cases. You either want to review data from CTR in an external system, which is typically a SIM or sometimes a ticketing system, or you want to be able to trigger actions within CTR, but trigger it from the outside. So this is more typical of a SOAR tool, and you require APIs in both cases. So we do have a set of read APIs that allow you to query incident data, message data. If you are using the quarantine hide mode, they would allow you to fetch that message after it was quarantined, because it is in the user's mailbox and we can still programmatically access it. And of course, you can download the message body. You can do all of that right now with these APIs. Similarly, we also have APIs available now to trigger workflows in CTR. So these are workflows you would have set up beforehand. Most common use cases are you're reviewing an abuse mailbox submission, which required manual reviews, and you set up different workflows to classify them as either clean or a threat or spam and so on and so forth. So as long as you have finished configuring those workflows and they're good to be used, you can now trigger those workflows via an API in an external SOAR tool. So you can use the same SOAR tool to get that message data out via the set of APIs on the left, and use the API, the workflow API, to actually trigger change in that message after it was reviewed by you in the SOAR tool. I also have heard customers with a use case where they have a message, which is a very random message, which may not have been condemned or been reported directly into the Proofpoint ecosystem, but they just want it removed from the user's mailbox. So in that scenario, we also now have an API, a set of APIs where you can create a brand new incident, upload the details about this message, which is like the message ID, the recipient address. These are the bare minimum. And then you just trigger a workflow to say quarantine these messages, right? So you can be completely hands off without needing to get into the CTR UI and use the incident and messages pages and get all of this done through an API integration. These integrations are agnostic of a single vendor. We have been working with several popular vendors out there to help them build more native modules or apps within their ecosystem, and they're all working well towards this goal. But in a lot of cases, customers have just been able to use these APIs directly in their tool of choice and start benefiting from some of these use cases. So let's talk about subscription bombing. Subscription bombing is a relatively novel thing on the threat landscape where a targeted end user is bombarded with hundreds, if not thousands, of emails in a very short period of time. This bombardment can carry one of two nefarious intentions. One of those could be to hide an actual, say, password change that may have been triggered on their account. And that reference to that red envelope, which is hidden amidst a lot of white envelopes, because all of those other emails are just drowning out that one password notification email. Or this could be a ruse to reach out to this targeted end user via a different channel. The Teams is an example, but it could really be anything else, where they impersonate an IT help desk person and say, oh, looks like you're being bombed. Click here and we'll help you deal with the problem. And you can imagine what can happen after they click on that link. And Proofpoint has recently released advanced detection and classification capabilities using our machine learning and various other models, which are part of the Nexus family, to detect and stop a bombing attack as it transpires. But this detection and classification is based on volumetric tracking, because we need to see a burst of emails being delivered to the end user in a short amount of time, which means there's always going to be a few emails that were initially delivered to the targeted end user, which now need to be cleaned up. And that cleanup is what is now going to be performed by CTR. You could both quarantine the message, as you always do, or you could actually move those bombing messages into a low priority folder, because all of those emails are actually benign. They are newsletters, they are other kinds of bulky kind of emails that are coming from various organizations, but they're just something you never signed up for, right? So there may be a security policy with some organizations where they don't want to remove those, but move them to a folder, and even that can be done via CTR. So just an example of something new or something more that's new in CTR, which you should start using it for. Yeah, so this is an example of what the setup can look like. We're going to have a bomb protection source. There's going to be a workflow. The workflow can help you either quarantine the message or move it to a folder, which can be the default low priority folder available with our unified add-in, or you could configure it to any other folder by naming that folder as you wish in the user's mailbox. That wraps up my section. So hopefully, I know it was a lot of detail. Hopefully I made a good case for you to understand the benefits of moving to CTR, and I would encourage you to do so.
Excellent. So what I'm going to talk about now is what does the process look like in terms of moving to Cloud Threat Response. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can access Cloud Threat Response. Cloud Threat Response is part of your TRAP licensing. So this is not a product that you need to purchase. You are entitled to it as a current TRAP customer. And in most cases, your Cloud Threat Response tenant is already provisioned. We pick an initial user and we provision that tenant. And so if you'd like to check if you have access to it, and if you're that initial user, you can use the app switcher. You can go to any cloud-based product here at Proofpoint. So that might be the TAP dashboard, the email protection, cloud admin interface, and go into that app switcher dropdown and select threat response. You also can go into the app catalog, so you can navigate to threatprotection.proofpoint.com and you'll see the threat response tile and you can select that. Or you do have the ability to go directly to threatresponse.proofpoint.com and you'll log in using the same credentials you use for any other cloud-based solution here at Proofpoint. So TAP, Cloud Admin, email fraud defense, things like that. If you attempt to go into the app switcher or the app catalog and you're not seeing that threat response tile or you're getting an error when you enter your credentials, that's a great opportunity to reach out to the CTR onboarding distro. It could be a situation where your cloud threat response tenant has been provisioned, but maybe you're not yet an administrator on that, or we need to look into some things on the back end. You also can open up a support case within our community portal and get assistance that way. Before we dive into the migration, I just wanted to kind of orient us a little bit in terms of TRAP versus Cloud Threat Response. So one of the things that I really love about Cloud Threat Response as I'm working with customers is it is intentionally simplified and just much easier to use. So if we build out the first item on this slide, the sources are serving that same function as TRAP on-prem. So in TRAP on-prem, TRAP does not have any intelligence of its own of what messages we need to pull. Cloud Threat Response is the same. So we have our sources set up, which ingest those message details and essentially tell the system which messages to go and take action on. Once those message details are ingested, we need to understand what automation to execute on it based on the message details. So in TRAP on-prem, that is match conditions, defining if a tap alert comes in and it's a permitted click, go and quarantine the message. We still have the same premise. We have rule sets that are defined to execute automated actions, just like the match conditions and TRAP on-prem, but we call them something different. We call them automation workflows in Cloud Threat Response, and they do have a different structure to them. So this is an area where it's going to be probably the biggest difference in moving from TRAP on-prem, but the guide is going to walk you through all of that, and we get a lot of good feedback that automation workflows, the way they're set up, and actually the predefined system status of those, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is easier to understand and work with than match conditions on-prem. So once the source ingests those message details and the automation workflows dictate what automation needs to occur, the last key configuration component is the mail server connection. So same as TRAP on-prem, we need access to your mail servers in order to go into those user mailboxes and remove the message from the user's mailbox or restore the message to the user in the event of something like a false positive. So that remains the same, slightly different setup. I would argue a little bit easier than TRAP on-prem, but kind of an analogous function there. So when you're doing your configuration, you're actually going to be walking backwards in this process because we want to start with the mail server configuration and then automation workflows, but we don't want to turn on the sources until we're ready to ingest those message details and really cut over. So you'll see as we progress through the presentation, sources are really meant to be kind of your on-off switch in Cloud Threat Response. You are going to leave those disabled, but get everything else ready to go in Cloud Threat Response. This gives you an easy cutover process and gives you the ability to configure everything in Cloud Threat Response until you're ready to cut over. Just a couple of key milestones that you'll step through as you conduct the migration. So starting with mail servers, we do recommend establishing that connection to the mail servers, ensuring that we're able to connect, and just ensuring that we are able to access those mailboxes. This is often the hardest part of a Cloud Threat Response deployment or migration. And the good news is, as TRAP customers on-prem, you guys have already done the hard work of setting up those app registrations or creating those service accounts for Exchange on-prem. So a lot of that can actually be reused for Cloud Threat Response. Then you're going to move into automation workflows where you're going to really just adjust the best practice workflows, which ones to turn on, which ones are applicable to us, and then apply any customization that might be needed. And then lastly, you want to go to the sources and do any defining of your abuse mailbox, and then eventually planning for and conducting the cutover. And then we'll talk about TRAP on-prem and retiring that. So we're going to start with that mail server piece and just give you a high-level overview of what that looks like. I want to go into a little bit of details in terms of the setup itself. We do have that new quarantine mode available for Exchange Online. The thing to keep in mind there is if you are executing quarantine actions as part of testing or shortly after cutover with Cloud Threat Response, it is going to be a different mode of accessing those quarantine messages. So they aren't going to be in a central repository or quarantine mailbox anymore. So we do have some documentation documentation available on communities and linked out in the deployment guide that detail the new method of accessing those quarantine messages if your SOC analyst or your team needs access to them. The other big considerations for Exchange Online relate to the Graph connection. So we do strongly recommend using Graph API as your connection type in Cloud Threat Response for Exchange Online. First and foremost, because US Exchange Web Services is planning to be deprecated for Exchange Online in October of next year. So we want to make sure that you have kind of the latest and greatest and don't run into any issues with all the work that you've done next year if you choose to go to EWS. The second, Graph is just we see a much better experience on Cloud Threat Response with that latest API endpoint on the Microsoft side. So we want you to have the best experience on Cloud Threat Response. And in order to do that, we do recommend leveraging Graph. There are a reduced set of permissions. If you are moving your Graph connection from TRAP on-prem to Cloud Threat Response, you will have to make a couple of adjustments there, but it's all detailed in the guide for you. And then with Exchange on-prem, largely remains the same. The only key consideration here is that your EWS URL for your on-prem Exchange server does need to be accessible by a set of cloud-based IP addresses. And then if you're a Google customer, you guys are kind of happy days. Everything is the same kind of carried over from TRAP on-prem. So if we build this out one more, just from a high level perspective, setting up the mail server is really just establishing either a new authentication, or you can reuse the existing authentication from TRAP on-prem. If you have all those details, just kind of copy and paste from your on-prem system, and then configure and enable that mail server connection. And then there is an option to validate that connection. I did want to just pose that there is an optional step here I sometimes do with customers. The validation of the connection really just looks at, right, are we able to connect? If you want that full confirmation before cutover that you are able to quarantine and restore, we do have the option to use a CSV upload. This is a different process than what you might have used with TRAP on-prem. This is an incident-based function in Cloud Threat. We will create an incident, give it a title, and then once that incident is created, you'll be able to upload the CSV file directly to the incident and then quarantine those messages directly. So in step one, while you're doing that mail server setup, if you want to confirm the quarantine and the restore process without turning any of those sources on, this is an optional step, not required, but helpful for some customers. So we've established the mail servers, we've gotten through the hardest part of the configuration. So next we want to move on to automation workflows. So I like to think of these in kind of two different buckets. There are going to be just workflows that you need to enable. So the best practice or system workflows, those are really aligned to what we feel is an ideal implementation for Cloud Threat Response, as well as what we typically see for kind of a best practice setup in TRAP on-prem. So these are preceded or predefined workflows in Cloud Threat Response, and they are set up with our best practices. So it's really a matter of going through the guide, evaluating the workflow, and deciding, do I need to enable this for my organization and based on my match condition setup in TRAP on-prem. With the system workflows, there is a little bit of customization in terms of the email notification. So who should receive notifications around things like quarantine failures or restore failures. And then with Clear in particular, you may want to customize any of the email templates going to users. But for kind of the system workflows or following our best practices, it's a very simple process of turning things on and then modifying or customizing in just a few areas. Now, because in our recommended cutover process, we are leaving the sources disabled, you are able to enable all of the best practice or applicable workflows pre-cutover and kind of get them all staged and ready, because until these sources are enabled, nothing is coming into Cloud Threat Response, and so no action would be taken. So the system workflows are very focused on our best practices here at Proofpoint. And so there is limited customization within the structure of that workflow. So you can't change the conditions in the if block in terms of what we're looking at, but you could deselect or select different elements within that condition. If you need additional customization, the most common situation that we see for this are things like email notifications for Clear. For the workflows, the Clear workflows, you are unable to remove the email notification in the system workflow that fires after analysis for each of the different verdicts. So if your organizational stance is we do not want to send an email template to our users after Proofpoint has analyzed the message, then that is a situation where you won't be able to make that change within a system workflow. So what you'll need to do is clone the workflow and essentially give that cloned workflow a new name. With customers I work with, we often do things like no email notification or no end user notification, just to identify why we're cloning that workflow. And then we're able to edit the workflow and enable it. So in this case, just a slight modification of removing that email notification, but keeping the structure and everything else the same. Then we would save that workflow in an enabled state, and we would disable the system workflow. So you're essentially very closely aligned with still Proofpoint's recommendation, but if there is a situation where you're unable to make a change that your organization is requiring, you can clone and then make those modifications. I will say that we do strongly recommend leveraging those best practice system workflows. So those are designed to ensure that you have the best experience with cloud threat response and are getting maximum protection for email-based threats that are identified post-delivery. So I would suggest that as you look at any customizations, really consider, do we need to migrate this up to cloud threat response? Sometimes I see conditions where maybe it was an isolated event or it was a vendor exclusion and that organization is no longer working with that particular vendor. So rather than just blindly carrying up those customizations into cloud threat response, really thinking about, do I absolutely need this? The good news is workflow automation is really straightforward. So it should be kind of a quick hop into the source configuration. And the majority of sources are in a preceded or predefined state. And this is really meant to save you time. So your TAP source, your smart search source, as well as Workbench, and then you'll see those additional detections that Vivek and Ian talked about, IMD and Mailbomb. Those are already or will be preceded into the system. There's no additional customization that is needed. We've already connected everything on the back end that's required. Another note here is that you don't see that CSV upload source or the smart search CSV upload that you have with TRAP on-prem. Those are incident-based functions now, so they still exist as functions within Cloud Threat Response, but they're not in the predefined sources list. Really, the only customization or configuration that you'll need to do within the sources view for Cloud Threat Response is to define that mail server configuration. Here, you'll need to essentially point Cloud Threat Response to your abuse mailbox source that you're using with TRAP on-prem. If you are going to be pre-staging that, you want to make sure to save that in a disabled state. That will leave all your sources disabled and kind of staged and ready for cutover. One quick note here is we do recommend cleaning out the inbox of that particular abuse mailbox prior to cutting over or kind of pre-production. That allows us to start fresh in certain situations. Sometimes we can pick up those older messages and process those. So we do recommend staging it and getting it ready, but you want to keep all of those sources in a disabled state until you're ready to cut over. And that allows you to kind of plan and prepare for that true cutover date. We have our mail server connected. We have our workflows all configured and notifications adjusted if needed. And then we have our abuse mailbox ready to go and kind of pre-staged. So at this point, everything is ready with the exception of the sources. And I like to think of the sources as really your on-off switch for cutover. And we do have a recommended progression of a cutting over the source. So we recommend starting with your smart search source. And the process is going to be enabling the source, in this case, smart search and cloud threat response, and then disabling the equivalent source in TRAP on-prem. So you enable it in cloud, you disable it in TRAP on-prem. Nice, easy cutover, no downtime. I saw that question earlier, no downtime in terms of that migration. And then there is documentation in the deployment guide in terms of how to test each of these sources. So you can enable a particular source, test it, and then move on to the next one. So after smart search would be TAP, followed by abuse mailbox, and then any remaining sources. And just a reminder that you do want to make sure you disable that source after enabling the equivalent source in Cloud Threat Response. We do get either race conditions or kind of conflicting actions sometimes between the two systems if you have, say, the TAP source enabled in both Cloud Threat Response and TRAP on-prem. So you only want that source to really be enabled in one system. And then please take a look at the deployment guide. We have some new testing procedures, in particular for Clear, that will give you the ability to test all those dispositions in Cloud Threat Response and just confirm that you're seeing all the expected functionality from your new setup. We'll just do a quick reminder, some of the things to keep in mind with TRAP on-prem. So you've cut over to Cloud Threat Response, but you still have your trap appliance kind of sitting there in a disabled state. Now, no data migrates from trap on-prem to Cloud Threat Response. So when you enable your sources in cloud and disable them in trap on-prem, you're essentially starting fresh from that point and going forward on Cloud Threat Response. We do recommend keeping that data and keeping your trap appliance available with those sources in a disabled state for a period of time. Could be a few weeks, it could be months. It just depends on your organizational needs and retention policies. I like to think about it in the terms of how long will you need to reference that data in terms of why a particular quarantine was executed or what happened with a particular message, say, 3 months ago. Once that time frame has passed and you no longer need to be able to go back and reference why did we remove this message from this user's mailbox, say, back in January, then that's the point where you can take a backup of your appliance and then fully decommission the VM. So cutover isn't kind of the end of the road, but you are very close. You'll just keep that trap appliance referenceable, but in an inactive state, and then decide when is right for you and your organization to fully decommission it. We don't want you to feel like you're alone in this process. I have worked with hundreds and thousands of customers that have successfully moved to Cloud Threat Response using the comprehensive deployment guide and self-enabling. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. We're excited that you guys are moving to cloud and we'll be reaping the great benefits of that new solution here soon.